look at those services and deciding who we want to bank with. You know, we do have a choice, taking a stand about what are our values as a city and what, you know, what's important to us. We could choose this a million things. So why choose Wells Fargo? And it was, you know, I try to agree with you on that. I will be taking a look at that extremely closely. And I also think when it comes to the police, the new police building, we're going to vote on that this week. So I don't know how many of you all know. I think for me, this is a very complex question. And it's something that I've given a lot of thought to because, you know, we all want to see good policing. We all want to see people feel safe in their neighborhoods, their homes, and their communities. But I would say that when we look at the root causes of this, I think that there are myriad of reasons why, you know, I have concerns here in Vallejo. Number one, let's start with the police department, the police building. The police department has asbestos in it. It looks raggedy. It has no heat. They have blue filters that are supposed to be keeping out carcinogens. They're just hanging, kind of on, kind of not on. I wouldn't want to work in that environment, and I don't think that you can get a good employee. Like, if I were an employee, I wouldn't be happy working out of that environment. I wouldn't be going into, you know, I wouldn't be doing my job the way I think that you can do your job. I do think that that matters when it comes to policing, making sure that we at least, you know, we can demand that they do their job and do it well and be professional. I think we also got to demand from ourselves that we do what we can to put them in an environment to do well. Because I don't think here in America, you know, if we pay someone like they're at McDonald's and they work in a McDonald's type environment, I don't think we can demand that they treat it like it's Ruth Chris. So treat it, you know, that's just not going to happen here. I think that it takes both sides. I think that we have to show that, hey, we respect what you do. We're going to support you. We don't want you guys in a bad environment, working environment. They've been there for a very long time. But then you can sit there and come back and say, hey, we also want to make sure that you understand about implicit bias, that you understand what it means to reach out to the community. And it can't just be during spikes, you know, because that's what I've noticed. Since I was a kid, there's a spike, something happens, people get riled up, then nothing gets done, police entrench themselves. That's not getting us anywhere. We need community conversations. We need to bring people to the table. That's something that I've spoken to the chief about. That's something that we're working on. It will not be public. It will not be in the newspaper. I'm not trying to get notoriety for it. It's going to happen in neighborhoods like South Vallejo. It's going to happen in neighborhoods like North Vallejo. And that's where these conversations need to happen. And that's where these conversations are going to happen. I've spoken to the police chief about it. He would agree. But like I said, I think that this needs to be ongoing, that we look at this, that we look at some of these problems and not just when there's spikes, because it's easy to sit there and say, hey, these police officers don't deserve any money, let them live in a shack. But you know what? That police officer isn't going to rich neighborhoods. They're going into poor communities. And so I want to make sure that we have quality officers who are happy and going into those neighborhoods and understand what we expect from them. But I think that some of the factors that we have here in Vallejo does not lend itself to people feeling happy about the job they're doing. And it's not just police officers. We have a huge turnover problem when it comes to city employees, period. You know, I was talking to a native Vallejoan who was thinking about taking a position in the city of Vallejo. She was an assistant supervisor, and if she were to come to Vallejo and be a supervisor here, she got to take a $20,000 pay cut. Who's going to do that? Quite frankly, even if we get more native Vallejo kids involved and get them into the police department, well, when that kid goes through the academy and he says, Mr. Brown, I just graduated from the academy. Benicia is offering me $20,000 more than Vallejo, 2 weeks more at paid leave, and a $10,000 bonus. What should I do? The kids, we're still going to lose Vallejo kids. So we still have to take a look at every factor when it comes, because it's not just one part. You know, there's bad apples in every bunch, but we need to take a really comprehensive look at what we can do to deal with public safety here in our community.
Hey, Mr. Brown, I wanted to cycle back to the public banking thing, because I was working on that as well. So there's a couple issues. One is that our city budget is so big that we are restricted by federal policy as to what banks we can work with. Basically, depending on how much you have in your budget, the bank has to have a certain amount of reserves. That kind of limits us to our top 5 big U.S. banks, which you know, some are maybe better than Wells Fargo, maybe we should consider, but it's sort of like, you know, none of them are all that great. But there is going to be this Tuesday, they're on the consent calendar, they're discussing the investment policy for the city of Vallejo. So the city of Vallejo has investments. We own stocks, we have, you know, mutual funds that we're invested in. Some of the stocks that we're invested in are, in my opinion, only me, less than desirable. Things like Chevron, Exxon, things that over time have been going down considerably. I mean, I wouldn't even call them, quote, blue chips anymore. I think we could replace them with stuff like Caterpillar stock, which has stayed, you know, consistent since the 50s and growth. But if people are interested, they could show up on Tuesday to discuss the investment that, or the investments that the city has, even though it might take us some work to figure out a go-around on the public banking and changing a bank. You know.
And I would agree with Morgan. City council member, I also have priorities. You know, we have people out here starving. We have kids who aren't getting the education that they need. We have seniors who are suffering. And for me, that has to be the main focus of what we're working on. And then we need to attack some of these other things. But there's only so much time in the day. We have to prioritize some of these things. And I think that the people who have no voice and can't be here, people like our seniors, people like our youth, and as well as our homeless in this community, it really needs to be addressed, and we need to focus on that. Next question. Mr. Edwards.
This is basically a matter of life and death. I think some of our council members ran on a platform to have a commission, police commission here in the city of Vallejo, much like the one in San Francisco. And I think it's about time that we, as a city, support something like that. We did have a Human Relations Commission, which was put to sleep, but it was basically taken out of the city because of a budget situation. But I think we need a stronger commission to oversee what our police department does when there are complaints. I think a couple of, maybe three, I'm not going to name them right now, but I know who they are, ran on a platform to have a police commission here in the city of Vallejo. And I think it's about time that we have that. Number two.
Mr. Edwards, I did want to say, please name them, because I don't think any that I know of, any of the candidates for city council ran a police commission. Not to take away, but that I know of. I didn't know that.
I would talk to you privately about that.
Fair enough.
And number two, the State Farm building on the waterfront. I do not believe that the highest best use for that piece of property would be for the police department, personally. Because, number one, we need income property on. We're talking about economic development. Well, we put the police department on the waterfront with their big trucks, their tanks, their military vehicles, their big whatever, on the waterfront. It doesn't look good, number one. And number two, that property could be set up to bring income for economic development here in the city of Vallejo. That's what we need.
Can I address each of those?
So that's just my comment. I just wanted to say that, and maybe something to think about.
And when it comes to the Vallejo Police and where they're going to be housed at, number one is the most expensive. We can tear the whole thing down, build them. The highest thing we can do is actually renovate the current building. It will cost 3 times as much as the building that they're talking about going into. The cheapest thing we can do is get into a building. Now, someone brought up a good point online, I think, where they talked about why not the library. I mean, you would absolutely need a building that big to house the police department. And once again, I think for me, I would agree with you when it comes to the Human Relations Commission used to be a great commission. I do think that some of the teeth have been taken out of that commission.
But it doesn't exist.
It does exist.
I
know someone who's on the Human Relations Commission right now.
They just started meeting again. So it existed all the way through that. The reason it
More benefits and more time off. And how does that affect us? Well, we're going to have problems recruiting good officers. When I spoke to the police captain about 3 years ago, they said that the way they rate police officers is on how they deal with the community these days. Back in the day, it might have been something different, but these days it's who can keep a cool head, who knows how to handle situations without them escalating. How are we going to get those officers if we can't pay them competitively? That's just the truth. You know, I mean, once again, I will say that we can't sit there and say they should take the money that they have, be happy with it, live in a cold building and expect them to come out and give officers here in Vallejo feel, and I understand we're dealing with bankruptcy issues, we don't have a lot of money, but the fact remains is if we're not getting if we're not able to recruit effectively and compete against these other cities, once again, even bringing in more Vallejoans, they're only going to leave and go to a city that's not as busy, if I could finish real quick, that's not as busy and it's a little bit safer. You know, when you look at the statistics, which I've looked at, there's Oakland when it comes to crime, and then there's Vallejo.
How we're using our property that's owned by the city. We have to figure out how to put a cap on how much we're going to pay people, and so on and so forth. So
economic people as it relates to how people are paid outside of just here, because we can't live in the bubble where we say we're bankrupt, we're broke, so take this money.
I understand that, but the key to this whole thing about having police officers and the numbers that we need is economic development. That's the key.
Yeah,
so
how to generate income.
Yeah, how to generate income.
And
if we squander what we're doing ahead of us, okay, like I said, I don't believe the highest and best use of that piece of property on the waterfront is the best use for the police department.
And thank you for sharing that,
So,
Mr. Edwards. We gotta keep going.
I understand.
But thank you for sharing that.
I've not heard the word training really much at all. Accountability, constitutional officers are up to speed on best practices, but the city itself is putting in place mechanisms to make sure that they have the tools in terms of training and knowledge to de-escalate situations, use proper uses of force, constitutional lawful use of force. And I would just note that you brought up Richmond. You know, a number of years ago, I'm a Vallejo native, I'm local today. In Richmond, Chief Magnus, who's now in Tucson, came in, high crime rate, very high officer shooting rate by officers, essentially through modern police practice. I'm wondering what plans, what conversations there are around implementing, for example, President Obama's 2015 best practices, task force practices.
Well, I don't know if you were here, but I did mention implicit bias training. I just had a meeting with, and we're going to be working on bringing some of that to Vallejo. I just had a conversation yesterday with Tamisha Torres, and I agree with you. Those are things that we need to look at. Our hiring practices, quite frankly. I would like to see, Vallejo is not Fairfield, it's not Vacaville. We are not we're a very urban city with serious issues that match the Bay Area. When our next police chief, I believe this police chief is retiring this year, we're going to have an opportunity to choose a new police chief, and I think that's very important. I will say this, I have been speaking to the current police chief almost every day since the incident occurred. We have been talking about training, implicit bias training, and things like that, but I totally agree with you. Please fill out a form as well and just write down all, because I couldn't write down everything you said, but you made up some very good
I'd love
points.
to see if any help, and I would just say I love the implicit bias training, also First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, those kinds of things.
Fair enough. And also, if I could add one last thing is, I don't know how many of you all saw what happened in Walnut Creek, but for me, number one, that's a veteran as well. And to see what I saw in Walnut Creek tells me that we need to make sure we're offering the services they need, because that was just, that was scary to see anyone waving a gun just in broad daylight, because anything can happen. And I think that my first thought was, man, this officer needs some help. What are we doing to surround that officer with the help that they need, because they're obviously going through some issues outside of our control. Right.